We're back, and I'm talking again, as I said, Jennifer Dance. When we left the break, we were talking about the Joseph Boyden quote, and I'd like to come back to that before we go on. How did that come about?
As I say, I found him on Facebook. He was somebody that I thought would really enjoy the book, and so in the messages I tried to keep it very short, but to let him know what it was about. And then when he said to send him a copy, we sent him an advance reading copy of the publisher, Dundurn, and he had about a month at that point in time before the book was going to print, and he knew that that was the deadline. So the night before the deadline, he emailed me saying that he was only halfway through, that he loved it. He thought that I was a great writer, and a natural, he said, but his schedule was frantic and he wasn't going to finish it in time, and he couldn't endorse it unless he'd read it all. So I was pretty disappointed.
Oh, yeah.
But at 7 o'clock next morning, there was an email from him with the quote.
Really?
No preamble, no letter that went with it, just the quote. With Red Wolf, Jennifer Dance has come howling out of the wilderness, and I'm deeply impressed.
Wow.
So the designer literally had an hour to get the quote on the cover before it went to print.
It's brilliant, though.
Yes, brilliant. It was so
Brilliant.
exciting. It's the highlight of my writing career thus
Oh,
far.
I'll tell you. It's really good to persevere, isn't it? As a writer, getting those things.
Well, that's right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And persevering, I mean, when you're trying to get a book published, you really need to persevere, because I was 10 years trying to get this published.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was written 10 years ago, Catherine, and I must have sent it out to every agent. I couldn't even get an agent.
Wow.
Couldn't even get an agent, let alone a publisher.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the Dundurn Press. What do you think finally made them pick it up?
I think it was the time being right. In the 10 years that I've been trying to get it published, people had become more aware, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had got going, and there was more in the press, and suddenly everybody realised that this was a hot topic.
That's right.
And it looks as though I'm jumping on the bandwagon, but I'm not jumping on the bandwagon, because I'd written it 10 years ago.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I guess that's the other thing, is if a writer has a story out there that's topical now, pull it out. Rewrite
That's
it,
right.
dust it off,
Yes.
send it off again.
Yes.
So now we've done the research. A little bit more about the writing process. So 10 years. How do you keep it fresh? I mean, did you write it in one draft, two drafts, keep coming back to it?
Probably it took me about 3 months to write the first draft. Then I think I put it away and brought it back out and edited it. I did that several times before I then started sending it out to people. And every time I got rejected or ignored by a publisher or an agent, I looked at it again. I tried to take criticism. If anybody had given me criticism about it, I tried to take that and implement it, because sometimes criticism is good. You need to keep your mind open to that.
Oh, yeah, the advice they give writers is don't be married to your words. Sometimes you have to give them up, put them away.
That's right.
Was there something hard that you had to give up?
Yes, I had talking ravens.
Oh, that sounds cool.
They were wonderful. It was when it was probably geared to a younger age group.
Oh, okay.
And they were so comedic, because you know how ravens chatter away.
Yes.
They've got temperaments and attitude, and I had put words into their mouths, and I had them hopping around. It was wonderful. And I had a talking blue jay too.
Oh.
But they had to go, because the topic was too dumbed down when I had that in it,
That's right, too. Although I never felt oppressed reading it. I knew it was going to be tough, but I don't remember being so down. I wasn't bored as an adult reading this, and I would be confident handing this over to a young child to discuss.
Excellent.
Maybe I should go back and ask you the most basic question is, why is this a topic of interest to you?
It's a story that I really needed to tell. I've always been passionate about justice and equality. I have a mixed-race family, so I'm really tuned into prejudice and racism. And Canada is known for its multicultural society. That was the reason my family came here in the first place. So when I learned about Indian residential schools back in the 80s, it was quite shocking. Yet other people didn't seem to know much about it, and it wasn't being taught in the schools. The subject seemed to be pushed under the rug. But it's coming out now, the truth's coming out, and along with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I get the impression that most Canadians are not that interested even now, because they don't really get it. I wanted to write a story that would touch the hearts of both children and adults, to give the history and the facts and the numbers a personal face. So whether the reader is a child or a parent or a grandparent, I want him to feel the loss of family. And I want him to be able to connect the dots and see why so many First Nations people today still struggle with self-identity and self-respect, and why the figures for unemployment and addiction and suicide, incarceration, they're all significantly higher than for the rest of the population. Why there's still a rift between non-natives and natives. Because I think that if these issues all go back to residential schools and the racist policies, laid out and enforced by the Canadian government's Indian Act.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you learned about this and about the schools in the 80s, and that's a point too. Your book is set early in the Canadian history, but the school system, this came straight into the 20th century.
That's right. The last school closed in 1996, which is mind-boggling.
It is. It really is. And I think the reading you did earlier in the show really starts to get a little bit of that punch when the father is taking the son to the school and, you have to stay here because you have to learn about this stuff. We can't do it. That child is going to be what helps them. And I just can't imagine being a parent standing on the other side of the fence watching that. That would just kill me.
Exactly. And I think the reason that I related to it, to the whole topic, was because in the early 80s when I first found out about it, I had just been widowed and I had 3 small children, 3 preschoolers. And they were my lifeline. All mothers love their children, right? But they were all I had, and I wasn't going to lose them for anything. I was going to do everything to be the best mother I could. Yeah. And the idea of the government stepping in and taking them away from me and there being no recourse under the law, it was just horrifying. Yeah. And it's been going on for 3 or 4 generations.
That's right. I guess that's something I don't understand either, is how the white man can come in and say, this is a law and you have to do it. And the native person, okay. How trusting were they?
They were manipulated. Mm-hmm. They really were. The reason that many of them went on to reserves in the first place, as the book describes, is because they were told that they would have a school there for their children. And many of them did want their children to have an education. They wanted to sort of keep up with things and become part of the new world. But when they got to the reserves, and they'd already put their crosses on the paperwork and everything, they didn't realise that made them part of the Indian Act, and therefore wards of the government, and their children, therefore, had to go to school. They had no choice. Yeah. And the schools, unfortunately, were not on the reserve, as they had been told that they would be. They were hundreds of miles away, and some children had to be put in boats, and later times they were flown out, and they were absolutely miles and miles away from their reserves.
That's right. Just a horrendous thing to think about. So listeners out there, if you want to grab that book, it's by Jennifer Dance. There is a copy in the library, and it's called Red Wolf.
It's just published by Dundurn.
Okay. What I also appreciated in your story is the young boy's, Red Wolf's, relationship with Christ. It was positive. I liked that twist. How did you come to do that?
Well, I'm a Christian, and although I recognise that the Christian church has been not the nicest,
That's always. Right, not always.
And that there are lots of First Nations people out there who are dead against the church because of that. I tried to put myself in the shoes of a little boy who comes from a completely different culture and who is being told this. And I think that's what I would have thought, that's what I would have felt.
I liked that it was different than his experience. He could almost identify with this figure that he knew very little about.
Yes.
And that was just a small scene in the book. It wasn't a large scene at all, but it was poignant for me. Now, if you don't mind, let's go back to the publishing process again for a moment. It took you 10 years of persevering, sending out letters. Once Dundurn accepted it, how long was it to get from their acceptance to print?
That took a long time too.
That took a long time.
Yes, pretty close to 2 years from when I signed the contract. 2 months short of 2 years to when it actually came out in print.
Wow.
I think that a year is about normal.
Okay, I'm going to show my ignorance here. I guess, what is the process? And they accept it. You've given them probably an electronic version.
Yes, that's right.
So they can manipulate that easily?
Well, they have a limited number of books that they publish each year, about 100, I think.
Okay.
And so you have to get put into the pipeline and you just have to wait your turn. And then when you get your slot for editing, then of course it's hurry up and hurry up. And
yeah. Actually, I should say too, Dundurn is one of the catalogs I enjoyed looking through as a librarian. They come up with some good quality books.
They do.
So kudos to you for getting accepted from them.
Thank you very much. And yes, they do come up with some quality books. Mm-hmm. And even the actual quality of the book, the cover, the paper, it's wonderful. I mean, it feels so nice and it looks so nice.
It does. Nice design too.
And yet it's not an expensive book. It's selling $12.99. That's not a lot for a book.
No. It's a little trade paperback. Be a great gift for a young person. Hey, March break is coming up. Summer vacation is coming up. Good time to have a little book. And yeah.
That's right.
That sounds good. So we're going to lead into another reading to finish off the show here. Can you tell us about that, what the reading that you're about to do? It's a little bit later in the story.
It is. It's a little bit later in the story. I think Red Wolf is about, well, he's been in school for 2 years anyway. Mm-hmm. And he's heading back home for the 2-month vacation with his family. But of course, every time he goes home, he's more alienated from them because he's received all this indoctrination and his life has changed so dramatically. And so to relate to his parents is harder and harder each time.
I think we see that very well in your book, too. The struggle of him trying to... I mean, how old was your character when he went away in the first place? Very young.
Yeah, between 5 and 6.
Yeah, can you imagine a 5 or 6-year-old trying to make sense of a totally alien environment, a different language?
Yes.
And then having to come home and integrate that somehow?
Yes.
That's just wild.
Yes, and they were also told that they had to teach their parents over the summer. Yes. The priests had given them little assignments to turn their parents away from their evil ways over the summer vacation.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot to put on a 5-year-old, 6-year-old shoulders to go.
Yeah.
So yes, we're about to wrap up. Again, people, that's Jennifer Dance. The book is Red Wolf. You can get it at probably Blue Heron Books in Uxbridge. Borrow it at the library if you'd like. And Amazon, did you say?
Yes, Amazon.ca.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up now with one final reading. Okay, Doug?
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. The previous September, when Red Wolf returned to school to start grade 2, Crooked Ear had lingered again at the edge of the forest. After several days, he seemed to understand that the boy was not coming back, so he turned his nose south and let instinct take him back to Clear Lake, where he was born. Seraph was not pleased to see his nephew, driving him away from the pack as before and allowing him to live only on the fringe, until Crooked Ear once again displayed complete subservience. The cold months passed, and finally the frozen lake began to thaw, and the wolves basked again in the sun on the granite outcrop high on the ridge. Seraph's second litter was born, and it was then that Crooked Ear's legs became restless, and he felt the urge to move on. When the trilliums faded on the forest floor and new leaves unfurled on the maples, he trotted away from Clear Lake, drawn once more to the place where instinct told him the boy would reappear. And there he waited. When the scent of the little upright drifted to his twitching nostrils, Crooked Ear yipped and quivered with excitement. Red Wolf, too, was overjoyed to see his friend again. When he nestled his face into the wolf's fur, the turmoil inside of him became still. But the boy's reunion with his parents did not have the same calming effect. In their presence he felt stirred up inside, and he behaved in ways that he didn't understand. It was as if he was a pot of stew boiling over the fire. Great globs spattered over the edge, burning whatever they landed on. His parents still called him Mishka Mayangun. It was Mishka Mayangun this, Mishka Mayangun that, until finally he blurted out, "Don't call me that. I'm George. Are you stupid? Why can't you remember it? Say it. Say George." He who whistles and Star Woman were speechless, their mouths agape, dismayed at the anger that spewed from their son's mouth along with the foreign words. He spelled out the name, George, George. There was no response. George continued his tirade, unable to stop. "Mr. Hall is right," he yelled. "You are all ignorant savages. There is no point in trying to teach you anything, because you'll always be stupid." The boy felt as though he was canoeing through white water, alone, without a paddle. He wanted to get out of the wild river, but he couldn't. It was running too fast, and he was being carried helplessly along. George looked into his mother's face and knew he had gone too far. Shame flooded him. It was even worse than the shame he felt every day at school. He ran from the cabin into the bush, unable to look at them another moment, wanting only to escape from the feelings that roiled inside him. Part of him wished that summer would last forever, but there was another part of him that wished it would be over right away. But as with everything else in his life, he had no control, and in due course hot days gave way to colder nights, and fingers of foreboding clutched his gut. He who whistles walked his son back to school. It was a sad procession of man, child, and wolf. Each walked silently, heavily, as though he had a great weight on his shoulders.
That's it for Shelf Life. For more information about libraries' programs and services, check out our website at www.whitchurch-library.on.ca or follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Or